I had absolutely no qualifications to ever get involved in politics at all. Indeed, I didn't even go to university, so this tour is very welcome, because it's the only chance I ever had of getting there. I bombed out of school after a very expensive education that I squandered, and went straight to work for a firm called Drexel Burnham Lambert. Some of you may remember the name. And I was involved in commodities trading. There is no more global business than trading commodities. So from an early age, I was used to meeting and travelling all over the globe. I'm a free trader. I'm a free marketeer. I believe in individual liberty. I did support Margaret Thatcher, but I'm not even particularly right-wing. And yet I had one idea. Back in the early 1990s, I looked at the development of the European Union, and it seemed to me that that was taking away from us as a country our democratic rights, our ability to make our own laws, the supremacy of our own courts, and indeed, I felt it was inhibiting our ability to trade and have relationships with a bigger, broader world, and in particular, an English-speaking world. So it seemed to me that we had to cut the Gordian knot of European Union membership so that we could be a free nation. Actually, at the time, I thought it's so logical that this is going to be really, really easy. Little did I know, but I've now begun to understand, that humankind is generally pretty scared of change, and that the status quo is an enormously powerful thing. Because with the status quo, power and money never wants anything to change, regardless of the morality of their position. So I've learnt something. When William Wilberforce, in 1780, stood up and said, "I'm going to dedicate my life to the abolition of slavery," little did he know that for 25 years he would be the most hated person in Britain. Not hated by ordinary people, but hated by the merchants of Bristol and Liverpool, hated by the political class, who they themselves had got rich on the back of slavery. And as his campaign develops, he writes that people come up to me and whisper behind their hands, "Of course, William, we think you're right, but we dare not say so in public." And you go on, perhaps to the 1930s in my country. Everybody in Britain thought Hitler was a very good man. This has all been very conveniently forgotten. You know, from 1933 to 1936, leading national newspapers saying, "Where's the British Hitler?" The King of England, taken in by Hitler. Lloyd George, our First World War leader, taken in by Hitler. But there was one man who thought Hitler was a bad guy. His name was Winston Churchill. And from 1933 until 1939, he warned that Hitler was a bad guy, that Hitler was breaking all the terms of a treaty, that we needed to rearm and get ready for what was about to happen. And Churchill was the most pilloried, lampooned, cartoon man of the 1930s. It was thought that finally his alcoholic consumption had driven him completely and utterly bonkers. But he was proved to be right. And you see, the fact there is a consensus, the fact there is groupthink, the fact that those at the top have agreed on a settled position doesn't necessarily mean they're right. So my crusade and my mission ran bang into Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, the multinationals, and almost the entire British political establishment. You know, in 2001, at that parliamentary election, we had 651 members of parliament, and not a single one of them supported EU withdrawal. And so what I've found is when we finally got to 2016, and we got to these seismic shocks to the body politic of Brexit, and if that wasn't bad enough, Trump, and everyone thought this terrible disaster had befallen the world. And what has happened since 2016 is there is a total refusal by the establishment to accept those democratic results. They are doing everything they can to continue the demonization of the individuals, to find excuses as to why this happened, and the nonsense conspiracy about Russia. I mean, goodness me. I mean, there was this article in The Guardian the other week that said that I was at the center of this international spider's web, that I was running memory sticks from the White House to Julian Assange and on to Putin. I mean, I wish I was that important. I really, really do. But I think what's happened here is there have been some absolutely fundamental misconceptions spread about those of us who are called nationalists. I actually reject the term nationalist. I describe myself as a nationist. I believe the nation state is the fundamental building block. I think it's that to which we owe our allegiance. It is that to which we pay our taxes, maybe reluctantly, but we do kind of pay our taxes. And it's that in extremis that we would be prepared to make sacrifices, to stand up and defend. And the idea that somehow a Brexit vote and a Trump vote means the world is going to turn in on itself, frankly, is nonsense. If you look at what President Trump has done in terms of foreign policy, he has, through direct intervention, led to massive, fundamental reforms that you're seeing in Saudi Arabia, and very welcome ones, I believe, too. And you could argue that his tone, his tough tone, is actually going to get the North Koreans around the negotiating table. So far from being this completely isolationist president, actually, he's out there on the world stage and he's making a bigger impact than Obama ever did during 8 years. And as for criticism of his tariffs, well, I said at the start, I'm naturally a free trader, but the hypocrisy of the international community condemning Trump for putting tariffs on steel and aluminum when the European Union had already done this last year, and yet they're seen to be the good guys because they're the globalists and he's the bad guy because he's a nationalist. And perhaps worst of all, where the demonization has really been at full pitch, is the fact that those of us on our side of the argument have dared to talk about immigration, the subject that everybody wants to brush under the carpet. In my case, it was very simple. This is a British passport, but the first two words on it are European Union. So that passport isn't effectively available just to 65 million Britons. It's available to 500 million Europeans. So those of us that want to control immigration, we're not saying that we dislike people from other countries. What we're saying is we want rational, ordered immigration. We want people to come into our countries in controlled numbers, but that can actually speak our language, integrate with our culture, obey our laws, pay taxes, and be a benefit to society. And do you know something? That opinion is held by vast majorities in every single country in the Western world. And ultimately, what 2016 was about, it was about the bubble at the centre being told by the people they were wrong. So it's not been easy taking on the establishment. I have been the most demonised figure in modern Britain. I mean, it's been so appalling at times, I just don't read the newspapers anymore. It would really upset my breakfast far too much. But all of this has led through to a major problem in our colleges and our universities, in America, in the UK, and across much of Europe too. There seems to be, amongst many of our young people, a profound ignorance as to what Brexit's about, as to what Trump's about, a profound misunderstanding as to why people wanted trade. And it's led to a shutting down of something really vital. Jennifer, at all of the meetings so far, has talked about critical thinking. It's a phrase that you've used over and over and over, and you're absolutely right. I fear that in too many of our educational establishments, youngsters are being taught this is the right view of the world, and those who take the other view are sort of neo-Nazis or some terrible pejorative term. It also is an absolutely essential feature of democracy that you respect the fact that somebody with a different view is entitled to have it. Now, Jean-Claude Juncker, Mr. Juncker, the president of the European Commission, the high priest of a United States of Europe with its own army, its own police force, its own government. And I, of course, am the opposite. You know, I am the godfather of Euroscepticism. And you know something? We have completely different points of view, and yet we can sit around and have lunch and have a very civilized conversation. And I would say to anybody, I genuinely like Jean-Claude Juncker. That is what we need more of in our democracy: understanding, respect for people who have different points of view. And that is why, when this concept hove into view, that President Fox and I could go around America and speak at some universities, I jumped at the chance and cleared my diary, because I think what is happening this week is really, really important. Teaching young people that debate, passionate debate, and President Fox and I have some very different views on things, but actually we've been pretty civil with each other, I think, haven't we? And we've done it in as good a humour as we can, and that, I think, is an important lesson for young people to learn. But furthermore, you know, it's been so awful, hasn't it, to see safe spaces, the no platforming of people, the idea that ideas that don't suit some individuals should actually be shut down. I mean, the last university debate I did was at Trinity College, Dublin. I mean, I virtually had a police force and an army have to protect me to get me in the building, because so many people thought that what I had to say should not be heard by those students. So I think, I believe that as this week has developed, it's begun to pick up momentum. I think the fact C-SPAN covered the event live last night, the fact that NBC and Fox are now talking on their mainstream programs about this series of debates, is an absolute triumph. And I've been actually very pleasantly surprised that the students themselves have treated the format with respect, and they've sat there and listened. I mean, one or two protesters outside, but nothing particularly serious. Maybe tonight at Lafayette will be different, I don't know. But, you know, what if it is, and even if we did get disturbances tonight, do you know something? We just get more publicity anyway. So it wouldn't actually be a bad thing. So I want to say huge thanks to the universities, the presidents, the chancellors, the Steamboat Institute, and to President Fox, everybody for making this happen. And what I've picked up from my pals here in DC last night, and one or two I've met at breakfast earlier, is the sense that they want more of this to happen. So bravo for the work that you've done. I think you've started something that could become really very, very big. And most importantly, it's been fun, because it needs to be. Thank you.